Hi, Ollie Tiernan, and this is part 2 of my story of Berlin. The Berlin Wall and the Cold War. To understand America's part in the Berlin Wall and the Cold War, we need to look at what happened after America and its allies defeated Germany in World War II. Germany was divided between America, England, France, and the Soviet Union. Each of the allies governed their zones in different ways. Being a socialist state, the Soviet Union ruled their zone, called the German Democratic Republic, or GDR, with socialist and communist ideas, turning East Germany into a harsh dictatorship. In 1947, America implemented the Marshall Plan, which sent aid to the Allied European countries that suffered damage during World War II. One of the agreements in the Marshall Plan was that Allies encourage democracy and discourage communism. That didn't sit very well with the Soviet Union. They refused help from the USA, looked to other communist countries for support like Cuba and Vietnam, and essentially began the Cold War. What does a Cold War mean? It basically meant that there was a whole lot of tension between the US and the Soviet Union, complicated by the fact that both countries had nuclear missiles in their arsenal. Any threat or military action could potentially turn to World War III and worldwide devastation. People under the Soviet rule in East Germany were very unhappy with the increasing repressive life under a communist government. They began to leave the GDR in droves. Where does the Berlin Wall come into all of this? Well, Berlin was smack dab in the middle of the Soviet Union zone in East Germany, but because it was Germany's capital city, it was divided among the Allies as well. The Soviet Union built a wall cutting off East Berlin from the west of Berlin to stop its citizens from leaving. Then they built a wall around the entire Soviet zone in East Germany. On August 12, 1961, a concrete wall known as the Iron Curtain was built by the GDR 4.2 meters high. There were orders by GDR officials to shoot anyone who tried to flee the GDR zone during the construction. From that day forward, East Berliners were not allowed out, and Westerners were not allowed in. The wall not only separates the city, but it separated families and the way of life for its citizens. In the Story of Berlin Museum, they gave a view of what people in the West, looking over the wall, would have seen. Citizens of the German Democratic Republic were not supposed to communicate with family members across the wall, so guards would move them along. The free world, including the American President JFK, voiced their opposition to the wall and what it stood for, creating more tension between the countries. In a move to try and get the Western Allies to leave Berlin, the GDR refused any surface transports to the Allied zones in the city. The GDR's East German zone surrounds the city of Berlin, so that meant no food, gas, or medical supplies get to the Western zones. Instead of retreating, America answered by flying planes over Berlin and dropping supplies to the Ally-occupied zones. It was known as the Berlin Airlift. This added to the tension between the two countries. While in Berlin, we visited the DDR, or Dutch Democratic Republic Museum. The DDR Museum gave an account of what life was like living behind the wall under Soviet rule. Ich war zufrieden und die Männer waren mir egal. Doch dann kam The lives of East Germans were heavily censored. Food was rationed. All television and radio stations were East German. Western television and radio programs were strictly forbidden. There were 39 newspapers and magazines, but there was only one point of view allowed. Training to be a good citizen of a socialist party began very early. Preschoolers had to take collective potty breaks. All children had to remain seated until the last was finished. As children grew older, they would learn to throw wooden grenades, not your typical playground activity. This was the beginning of learning to be a good communist, socialist citizen. East Germany made everything it consumed or traded for it with fellow communist countries. This left shortages and very little variety. To compete with the West Germans' VW Beetle, the GDR came up with the Trabant P50. It had many technical flaws, but it was pretty much the only car available, so it was in high demand. Some people waited up to 16 years to receive this car. At the DDR Museum, I was able to drive around the GDR in a Trabant with the help of a simulator. Art and music was restricted to government approval. Only music with German lyrics that were GDR approved was allowed. No rock and roll. They even tried to tell people how they could dance. The GDR thought dance should be suitable and classical. They made up an acceptable dance for young people to do called the Lipsy. The young people revolted and chanted, "We don't want the Lipsy or Ada Cole, we want Elvis and rock and roll." More seriously, it was individual human rights that were taken away from the citizens of the GDR, including freedom of expression. You were not allowed to criticize communism in any way. If you were caught speaking out against the GDR, you would be interrogated, put under house arrest, jailed, or worse. Many people risked their lives trying to escape the GDR. Escapees dug tunnels, hid in trucks of cars, rammed cars through the wall, and 2 families even constructed a hot air balloon to fly to West Berlin. And they made it. Many countries in the free world, including America's President JFK, spoke out on behalf of the people being repressed in the GDR. In 1961, while the Soviets were building the wall, Fidel Castro, the communist leader of Cuba, was gathering missiles given to Cuba by the USSR. This event was known as the Cuban Missile Crisis and almost ended in war. The US surrounded Cuba with 200 warships and demanded that all missiles be withdrawn from Cuba. Fidel wanted to strike, but Khrushchev, leader of the Soviet Union, told Castro, "It would not be a strike, it would be the beginning of nuclear war. Comrade Castro, I find your suggestion to be improper." Khrushchev and Kennedy negotiated and missiles were withdrawn. Then, an incident called Checkpoint Charlie happened on the border of the Soviet and American zones in Berlin. Tensions about an American diplomat being stopped crossing the border escalated into a 16-hour Army tank standoff. Again, Kennedy and Khrushchev negotiated and the situation was diffused. Any military confrontation between America and Russia could escalate into the use of nuclear weapons. The 2 countries knew what devastation that would bring, so they tried to avoid it at all costs. This man is named Stanislav Petrov, and you probably have him to thank for your existence right now. In September of 1983, the Soviet Union detected the launch of US missiles heading toward the USSR. Then they detected more. 1 nuclear warhead can destroy an area of 5 major cities, just to give you an idea of the devastation. Stanislav had orders to fire back within 15 minutes. He had the feeling that it was a false alarm and used his intuition and judgment to remain calm and not fire. He was right. Thanks for keeping cool, Stanislav. During the 1980s, the endless protests by world leaders, human rights activists, and even citizens of the GDR led Gorbachev to end East Germany's reign under socialism, destroy the wall, and open the borders. In November of 1989, the wall came down. Germany was reunified and the GDR was a thing of the past. The world celebrated with Germany. The side of the wall that was on the free side of Berlin was used as a canvas for many artists during the years it was fencing in the GDR. Today there is a section in East Berlin where they left the concrete slabs of the wall standing as an art gallery where people can come to reflect and remember.
Beedle-dum-dum, beedle-dum-dum, beedle-dum-dum. There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and Bert the turtle was very alert. When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He ducked and covered, ducked and covered.
He did what we all must learn to do. You
and you
and you and you.
duck and cover.
Be sure and remember what Bert the Turtle just did, friends, because every one of us must remember to do the same thing.
Remember what to do, friends. Now tell me right out loud. What are you supposed to do when you see the flash?
Duck and cover.